Now, you were Energy Secretary in the coalition government. You've obviously been following what's going on in Ukraine with the likelihood that if the SWIFT payments are withdrawn from Russia, a lot of Europe is going to have a great deficit in their supply of gas. Is this going to become the same kind of energy crisis that we experienced after the Middle East wars in the mid-1970s?
Almost certainly, though it will have a slightly different dimension. And that's the gas price dimension. Very much in the 70s, it was all about oil and petrol, which was so much more significant than it is now. But the gas is hugely significant for our business and particularly for people's heating bills. So this is where the battle, Putin's appalling invasion of Ukraine, will hit British people.
Nobody could have foreseen 6 months ago that he was going to do this, I suppose. But it's now, in terms of a cost of living crisis with energy, this is a perfect storm, isn't it? Or an imperfect storm, if you want to call it that. What can governments do, not just in this country, but throughout Europe, to mitigate the effects on the consumer?
Well, there are some short and sort of longer term things. I mean, shorter term, you've got to help particularly the most vulnerable who are going to be hit dramatically. So you've got to have some targeted support. If this goes as badly as I fear it will do, we might have some more universal support from government. And the government in our country certainly has got to do far more for the energy intensive industries. Those are the industries that use a huge amount of energy who are really, really suffering. So I think the support package has got to be rather bolder than we've seen hitherto, because this is going to last for longer than I think people thought. I mean, I've been talking to some economists earlier today, and they were saying that even prior to a Ukraine-Russia gas price push, they're looking at average heating bills, average energy bills going to £2,500 a year by the end of this year. So, could we be looking at £3,000 family heating bill? This would cause absolute mayhem and real stress and poverty for people if nothing else is done to offset that.
Two issues today. First of all, President Putin putting Russia on a nuclear alert, apparently because of what Liz Truss said about David Dagenham going to fight for Ukraine. Do you think that Putin is coming across as slightly unhinged at the moment? Because that's quite dangerous. I mean, if he is...
Well, the whole thing is hugely dangerous, and as soon as people talk about nuclear weapons, it's not surprising that everyone is deeply alarmed. My own view is that we can still do huge amounts of support for the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, both in terms of sending them military support, as well as humanitarian aid and the toughest sanctions regime possible, which we're getting close to, we're not quite there yet, to send a united signal to Putin. And all that can be done without him, going for the nuclear button. I don't think he would do that. And let's remember, it's not just up to him. Fortunately, there would be other people who would have to be involved. The question is, what are they thinking? I hope they're thinking what you've just said, that this is someone who has lost it in some way and no longer has the interests of the Russian people. I don't think he's ever had the interests of the Russian people at heart, but it's become clearer, I hope, to people of Russia.
Now, the Home Secretary announced this afternoon that at least 100,000 Ukrainians would be able to come here, but she hasn't gone as far as a lot of her critics wanted in saying that there will be no visa applications at all. She's citing security grounds for this. What kind of system would you want?
Well, if you look at what our European colleagues are doing, they're talking about a 3-year visa without any applications. The truth is, you could do security checks pretty quickly, and you could do them separately from a formal visa application process, which, if you've had anything to do with the Home Office, it will take months and months and months. So we need to do this in a much more generous, open way. We need to really respond very proactively, show that we will be part of a coordinated European-wide humanitarian response. And I think if the UK government is less open to welcoming people from Ukraine at this moment. Not only is it against British traditions, but I think it will look extremely bad in Europe.
But 100,000, I mean, that is a meaningful figure, isn't it? We haven't offered 100,000 Syrians, for example, and there are people who are saying, well, this is actually... it's great that they're going to offer 100,000 places for people, but why haven't we done this in the past for, shall we say, people who come from brown countries?
Well, there are many arguments behind that, and I do think there is a case for us being more generous in those circumstances wherever the battle is being waged. I haven't read the details of what Priti Patel said today. If she has fundamentally changed the policy as of yesterday, I will welcome that, but I'll test it to see if it really is up to scratch.
Do you think, obviously, 100,000 people coming in a relatively short period of time, that is going to put a strain on particularly housing? Do you think that there ought to be an appeal for people to take in Ukrainian refugees in their own homes?
Well, I know people who will. I mean, people have been writing to my own constituency saying, I'll have a spare room, I'll put a Ukrainian family up or a Ukrainian person. So I think actually there'll be a huge outpouring of support for Ukrainian people from the vast majority of British people. And that's exactly as it should be. But by the way, Ukrainian people are incredibly well educated, resourceful people who could add huge amounts to our country. That's not why we should do it, by the way. But I don't think we should be worried. This is but
they should also be allowed to work, shouldn't they?
Absolutely.
But then how do you can't discriminate and say, well, Ukrainians can, but Syrians can't.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what Liberal Democrat policy is. We think the current restrictions on allowing asylum seekers to work are outrageous. They're not good for the individual asylum seeker and the refugee, and they're not good for our economy.